the Forge of Asgard, a Quake weapon modding series I'm working on. I've had a lot of questions from Quake mappers about how do you mod weapons, how do you get started, and I wanted to tackle those in a video to at least go over high level what things you need to decide on in order to do Quake weapon modding, and then share these with the community at large. So, my name is Ryan Scissorhands, and I am the author of Arms of Asgard, a recently beta release mod for Quake. It includes 8 new weapons, each which has 3 different attacks. Um, Over time, I'm going to start dissecting how I do some of those, but I'm going to start out easy. I wanted to start with just like a tutorial of what you need to know in order to get into Quake weapon modding. So ultimately, there's 3 requirements before getting started modding Quake. One, you need some source code, so that's typically some QC files that contain the Quake C code that governs what everything does in the game. And you have to decide what source code you're going to start with. There's a couple different versions out there, and then there's, of course, community-made mods that offer a really solid code base to start from. Second thing you're going to need is something to compile your Quake C code into a progs.dat file, which compilers will automatically do, and that is ultimately what contains the binary information needed by the engine to determine how it's played for a given mod. And then third, you're going to need some Quake engine to actually run your mod. And there's a lot of options out there. So I'll be getting into that. Um, so for what is your code base? Vanilla Quake is a term used for ID1's source code that they released, and that is ultimately the basis of the game Quake, released in 1996. That's the only thing I'm really comfortable modding, or the thing that I have the most experience with. And then if assuming you are careful with your modifications, it would be compatible with any original maps or any vanilla Quake maps, assuming you use that as your base. However, Arcane Dimensions version 1.8 recently came out. That is a mod which includes a ton of maps and additions to the game. And they also have a development kit that is really good and provides a good basis for making a mod, because what it does is it adds a bunch of monsters, so it makes it more appealing for level designers and community mappers to map for your mod, because it increases the compatibility between maps that use Arcane Dimensions, say monsters and weapons and items, and your mod. The other thing I wanted to point out is that you could very well be doing modifications of Hexen 2, which is also made in the Quake engine. So even though it isn't Quake, of course, that is really um, it's still the Quake engine, and I know a lot of people transfer their skills over and start working in Hexen. I've never done it myself, but it still uses Quake C. So for my purposes, I'm going to be starting with the first one, ID1, because that's what I know the best. So for doing demonstrations, that's the best option for me personally. If you were to make a mod, though, I would also still very much encourage you to consider Arcane Dimensions as your source. The second thing you're going to need is a Quake C compiler, and then something, of course, some editing thing, IDE or some text editing program to edit the source code. I only have one recommendation, and that's FTE QCCGUI, maintained by Spoik. He also makes the FTE engine, but he also makes the editor, which compiles it. It runs all kinds of tests and gives you some really intelligent warnings about your code. So strongly recommend that. And then you can also configure it to load the engine of your choice, so that like you just hit F5 and it runs the newest version of your mod. Really, really great. And the third thing is what engine to use. There are a lot of Quake engines out there, and a lot of mods will be compatible with some and not others. When I first got into modding, everyone seemed to suggest Quake Spasm. At least all the developers said, that's probably the best one to aim for. I've actually found FCE for that engine to be much easier to do. So for example, testing multiplayer, FTE handles all the port forwarding and stuff and made it easier to set up my first deathmatch game in my engine. It also has a bunch of rendering options that I think can give it a really nice look depending on your mod. Modernize some of the effects and like particle effects and things like that in engine. But certainly Quake Spasm is one that a lot of people use. Dark Place is my understanding has fallen off a little bit, but it does have some visual enhancements that a lot of people like. And then for something a little bit more true to the original, Vulcan Quake or VK Quake or Mark V. I've never really used those. I, again, recommend FTE, but whatever engine you are committed to, you want to make sure you test your mod, the ones that you claim to support. That's the most important thing. So how do weapons work in Quake? It's a little bit complicated because not all weapons are the same, but this is ultimately the structure of it. There is a method that is called whenever you are clicking and attempting to attack and you are ready to attack, it calls the weapon attack method. This is sort of the source of all attacking code. And within that, it contains logic for what weapon are you using. So if your weapon is the axe, then it triggers the axe thing. The weapon is shotgun, and so on. So it contains this clause for what your weapon equals, and then it splits off from there based on what weapon you've chosen. Every weapon has to have certain things triggered. It has to trigger an animation, the actual thing that does the attack, so the thing that does the damage or spawns the projectile, and then some other things like triggering the sound, checking and consuming ammo, and then setting your attack cooldown. Those are out of scope of the discussion for now. I mostly want to focus on the animation and the attack function, but note that something has to do all of these out of scope things. They are required, but where it goes varies greatly and doesn't matter much for the purposes of our conversation currently. So here's the complication. 5 of the 8 weapons, the shotgun, super nail gun, grenade launcher, and rocket launcher, follow this pattern where weapon attack method is called. It says if your weapon is the shotgun, then trigger the shotgun animation, and then also trigger the attack function. So 5 of 8 weapons do that. That's the simplest way to do it. And as a result, if you're planning to start with a weapon mod, start with these 5 weapons, and then learn in the complications of the other 3 thereafter. That would be my recommendation. You don't need to know how to modify all 8 to get something working and start debugging it and see if you even enjoy doing weapon mods. Here's where the other 3 are different. Rather than being triggered sort of in parallel, the attack function is triggered by the animation. So same thing, weapon attack, checks the logic, what weapon are you using, and for the axe, nail gun, and lightning gun, it then triggers just the animation, and the animation is responsible for triggering the attack function. And each weapon does this for its own different reasons. The axe, every single time you attack, it starts the attack. It checks, do you have the axe? Yes, you do. Trigger the axe animation. The reason for that is that the actual attack doesn't happen until several frames into the animation because there's the wind up of the axe. So to make that timing work well, weapon attack does not trigger the attack function. That is actually done via the animation. The nail gun does it for a totally different reason. When you first start attacking, it does the same thing, does the check. Do you have a nail gun? Yes, start animation. The reason that it's best for the animation to trigger the attack for the nail gun and not the super nail gun is that the nail gun has the left-right alternating fire. And the only way to ensure that it's alternating is to let the animation be responsible for the attack function to ensure that when it plays the right animation for the right side of the gun, that the nail actually comes out that side. And so to ensure that that's synced properly, the animation triggers the attack function instead of being triggered in parallel. The lightning gun does this for a third and different reason. And that's because when you first attack with the nail gun, it makes the thunderclap sound. But thereafter, it doesn't. It only makes the zapping sound, for lack of a better phrase for that, constantly as you use it, but it only makes the thunder the first time. So when you first click it, it does weapon attack, checks, yes, I have the lightning gun, trigger animation, and the sound, the thunder sound. And then the animation triggers the attack function and the zapping sound. And then to see if it should continue to zap, that is handled within the animation to make sure it doesn't have to go back through this weapon attack method and doesn't trigger the thunder sound. So for today's demonstration, I'm just going to use the the shotgun is the easiest way to go about that. So I'm going to turn, here, I'll get to our project. We're going to turn the shotgun into a machine gun. So ultimately, there are 4 changes we have to make in order to make this happen. We need 1 pellet per shot instead of a whole bunch. We want to reduce the projectile spread because a machine gun shouldn't spread the same as a shotgun. We want it to shoot more frequently, and we want it to consume less ammo. And if we do these 4 changes to the shotgun and Quake, we should end up with something that is more similar to a machine gun and uses ammo at a similar rate. So that's what I'm going to do here. So FTE GUI is my editor. I am going to open that up, and I already have my Quake Spasm folder Forge 0, which is a blank ID1 source project. And in here, progs.source is the file I open up. And then it knows to open up all of the QC files. So you'll see definitions, subroutines, fight, AI, combat, weapons, all of that stuff is loaded up in the side, so I can jump from file to file. I can search for things much easier than it was when I modded back in the late 90s. So for our purposes, the only thing we really have to look at is weapons.qc. And I actually want to start by jumping to the weapon attack code and just taking a quick look at that. All right. So this is called, it says every frame, but I think it's more frequent than that, or it gets checked. And when you are able to attack, because you haven't attacked too recently and whatnot, it calls this method here, weapon attack. It checks to see if you have no ammo, wakes monsters up and does a bunch of stuff. And then the bulk of this code is just what weapon do you have, and then trigger the appropriate methods. So what you'll notice here, the axe up here has more code than anything else in this particular section, and that's because it triggers different player animations. There's technically 4 attack animations, I believe. Even 5 on the player model itself, but in the code there's only 4 here. And it randomly chooses which animation to do there. You'll notice that each one of these contains a line like this, self.attack underline finish equals time plus 0.5. This means that you fire the shotgun every 0.5 seconds. Or sorry, the axe, rather. Shotgun is 0.5, so this is basically your rate of fire, but in terms of time between attacks, effectively. All of these do this with 2 exceptions again, the nail gun and the super nail gun. Those just trigger the animation. The animation handles everything else from there. So what we're going to start with is, this is what it's called, these 3 things are called, when you have the shotgun and you're attacking. So this is the animation. Just a comment there. This is the actual attack. This is setting the attack time. So let's get this back up. 4 changes we have to make here: 1 pellet per shot, reduce projectile spread, shoot more frequently, and consume less ammo. Let's start with shoot more frequently, which will make it an insane weapon, but just because we're there in the code, let's tackle that now. Shoot more frequently, that is as simple as taking this 0.5, that sets your attack timer, and making it a smaller number. So now the shotgun should shoot 5 times as frequently, and that will be a very potent weapon indeed. So let's just check that out. I do recommend testing often and testing as you go. Nice. Yeah, it's looking like it burns a lot of ammo. All right, good. 1 down, we can go to our checklist, shoots more frequently. One down. All right, we're going to tackle 1 pellet per shot and reduce projectile spread at the same time. Now, to do that, again, we look at what happens when we attack. It triggers this. We know that's the animation, and we're just not going to deal with animations today. We're going to look at this weapon fire shotgun. So let's go find where that is in the code. Do a little search. And here we are. This is it. This is the shotgun code. Minus animations. It is 6 lines. It's really simple. So, what's going on here? First is just a definition of a variable, sound effect here on this line. This is your recoil. So self.punch angle underscore x, that means on your x-axis, up and down. For whatever reason, it just makes it go up a little bit, but then it will, by -2, but then it does recover back to your original aiming position. This is where it consumes the ammo. Actually, you know what? We might as well do all 3 of these the same time. 1 pellet per shot, consume less ammo, reduce projectile spread. So, since we cut the attack rate to 1/5, let's make this consume 1/5 of a shotgun shell per shot. Let's cut that to 1/5 there from 1.2. So every time it fires, it will consume 0.2 shells. This defines the direction, and then fire bullets. So let's see what's going on here. And whenever there's something going on that you don't know what it's doing, my recommendation is just look for that in the code, see what else is firing bullets. I really like FTE. It tells you what QC file it's in, what line number it is, and then it has the snippet of the code. So I can see that a couple other things call the fire bullets method. In particular, weapon fire bullets twice. This will be for shotgun, super shotgun, and then the soldier uses the same method. Let's go here, double click on that, and see what this does. So you pass in some variables every time you call fire bullets. It needs the shot count, so that's the number of pellets, the direction, and then the spread. So ultimately, by changing the numbers we pass fire bullets in this code here, the shotgun code, we can change 2 of those things. So if we've changed the fire rate, ammo consumption, make this fire only 1 instead of 6 bullets, and then we reduce the spread by, say, 0.04 to 0.015. All right, so that's a little more than 1/3 of what the spread used to be, and it only fires 1 bullet. Now the damage you're going to notice is going to be very low here. So we can do some things to change that, but we just first want to see how this looks in game. Make sure it compiles, no errors. Awesome. Fire up the game. All right. Well, it's definitely using up less ammo than I was expecting. That's good. But I suspect it's fairly weak. That actually wasn't horrible. Well, anyway, main thing I wanted to show you there was that it really isn't hard to get started modding. Like by editing 4 integers, I was able to turn a shotgun into a machine gun. It's really quite simple to get started. Few complex things, you need to read more code and learn how Quake C works and learn what tools are available at your disposal. I'm going to do one other little quick mod before I end this tutorial. Someone else had asked about could there be a lantern weapon that is simply just used to light up dark areas? And so I'm just going to very quickly demonstrate how easy it is to achieve that. Whether it's the way you want to achieve it, who knows? But I'm going to quickly jump to the axe. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to make something. I'm going to transition the axe into a lantern. For this tutorial, I'll just start by making a lighting effect in the game. Down the road, I will turn it into something that could actually be used as a weapon. But for now, all I'm going to do is make it so that something checks and turns either on or off a lighting effect on the player, depending on whether the axe is out or not. So I'm going to go to player.qc. This is where all the code that governs player movement and animations and things lives. And there are a couple of functions that are called constantly every frame, but I think it's actually more frequently than the actual frames happen. Player pre-think and player post-think are the two functions. I'm going to start with player post-think. This is where I'm going to insert the code to turn on or off the light. So first thing I'm going to do is just to make sure that I'm not modifying this very much, I'm going to do minimal changes to this code. I'm just going to call a method, which haven't defined yet, but I'll call it check for lantern. So that way, if I need to change this or remove it, I can comment out one line, and my code, my modifications, live outside of the original ID code. That's a generally good practice. So now that I've set it up so that that is going to be called every frame, I'm now going to define what that will do. So check for lantern equals, and within these brackets and semicolon, I define what will happen. Ultimately, I want to check if the player's weapon is the axe. I want to do something. And then, yeah, it's not the axe. I want it to do a different thing. So first, I'm just going to kind of frame it in, and then I'll put in the code later. So if you have the axe out, ultimately, I want to turn on a light. It's not already on. And then if you're not using the axe, I want to turn off the light. So that out. Trying to think of how I want to set this up as either a flag that the lantern is on or off for the player, or if I just want to check the player's lighting flag. I'll do it the simple way now. Now, one of the things I do when I'm coding is I often forget exactly what I need to put in to turn an effect on or off, or to give ammo or whatever that is. Whenever I run into that scenario, I just search it here, the bottom left-hand corner. So I'm going to go self.flag. So this is where you remove flags. I'm literally just going to copy this code and then modify it later. Okay. And then the flag I'm looking for is dim light, I believe. So I'm just going to do FL underscore dim light. Oh, not flag. It's an effect. Yes. Okay. So client.qc, you'll notice, has this. Let's actually jump to that code and see what's going on there. Oh, this is checking for power-ups. Now, this would be another place we could have inserted some axe code and said, oh, in here, ultimately, lantern out is a power-up, and you could define it there and have that in here. So this says, if your if you have the Ring of Shadows and it hasn't expired yet, then add a dim light to the player. If not, make sure there is no dim light. And I'm basically just going to copy this code to where I was looking in player.qc. There we go. Jumping back to player post think. All right. So, I'm a little bit worried that trying to toggle the light or trying to turn it on might turn it off again. So we'll just see how this goes. I just want to compare these two. Oh, it's not flags, it's effects. Right. So this should be, if your weapon is the axe, then make sure that the effect dim light is on. And your weapon is not the axe, turn it off. In theory, this should work. Compile, no errors. This is exciting. It might flicker. I have a slight suspicion that it might kind of loop. Yeah, it definitely looks like it's flickering, but I'm not sad about it. It actually looks really cool. Now, if you wanted the lantern to work a little bit differently and have the center of the light source not where the player is, but in front of the player, you could do that by having a glowing object or something other than the player's effects being toggled on and off. Yeah, I actually really like how that turned out, but it definitely isn't like always on. But that is the beginning of turning the axe into a lantern. Very briefly, the reason that's going on is I believe this will turn it on or off. What I would need to do is check if the light is on or off before toggling it in this chunk of code. I'm going to leave that out of scope for the tutorial because I'd like to wrap it up here. But there you have it. We have turned the shotgun into a machine gun, and we've already created a lantern effect for the axe. One of the things you could do, and I've done it with a hammer, is if you made it a lava axe, that would actually make sense because it's glowing. So when you have that out, you get to see around you, but you also aren't subtle and aren't able to sneak. Yeah, that is all I had planned for today. So, welcome to the Forge of Asgard. I'm hoping to do these periodically, do some things as recommended and requested by members of the community who say, hey, how would I do this? How would I do that? And then I'm also going to get into dissecting some of the Arms of Asgard weapons because some of them are really complicated. My weapons.qc file, I'm sure, is nearing 5,000 lines of code at this point. So I think there's some neat things that I managed to figure out that would be nice to show. In particular, the blood gauntlets, the hammer has some interesting stuff going on there, and uh, and the Spear Gungnir. I'm going to be doing some modifications and enhancements based on some of my beta feedback. So I'm going to be working on that over the next couple months before the end of the year. Thanks for tuning in.